Hello everybody, hope you guys are enjoying your day. Today we're going to be looking at your late season snowstorm, which is going to be impacting areas through the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast with some pretty hefty snowfall, about 2 to 6 inches of snowfall in some areas. Could even see a little bit more than that. We're going to be going over what the National Weather Service is showing, and we're also going to go over two models, the European and the GFS. They have slightly different outcomes, and we're going to be showing both of them, then kind of coming to a conclusion on what I personally think is going to happen with this snowstorm. Now, here is your current National Weather Service page, and we do have some winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings stretching from the Rockies all the way there into Ohio and Indiana with some winter weather advisories. We have some freeze warnings just to the south of that area over parts of Kansas and then another area through Kentucky, West Virginia, through southern Ohio and then much of Indiana. And then we also have some freeze watches for parts of Missouri through Alabama and then into Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia there. And then we have some freeze watches in effect for areas through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and Delaware as well. And if you are to the north of this area and you don't have a freeze watch, you most likely will be under freezing conditions or below freezing conditions. But since your growing season hasn't started yet, you most likely aren't going to be under a freeze watch until your growing season starts. So right now, these are the areas that are highlighted in these freeze warnings and freeze watches are the areas that already have started the growing season. Either that was in March or April for these areas, so that's why they have a freeze watch or freeze advisory or any of those things, because some of that vegetation could freeze over and it could be damaged. Now, here is your current European model forecast, and let's start looking at what it's showing. It does have a wide area of snow all the way from Colorado, Wyoming, through Nebraska, and then into Iowa. As we continue this, you start to see very heavy snowfall amounts or snowfall rates over southern Iowa and into northern Missouri. The National Weather Service is putting out over a foot of snowfall for some of these areas through southern Iowa and then through northern Missouri. I think that's a bit overdone, but it's definitely a possibility with what we're seeing. Now, how much of that actually will accumulate? Seen as this is coming overnight, it will most likely accumulate overnight, and then as you wake up the next morning, it'll probably all just melt away, probably within a day or two. So it's not going to be anything that's going to accumulate too much, and it's going to be a pretty wet snowfall. You see this freezing line, this 32-degree line, is indicated by this blue line, and anywhere to the north of this blue line is below freezing, of course. You see that a 32-degree line is only reaching Nebraska, then going just straight north up through South Dakota, and then the freezing line starts to move eastward through Minnesota and Wisconsin. So the area that you're actually seeing snowfall in is most likely 33, 34 degrees, but you do have some very cold air aloft. So that is going to help bring down some snowfall, but most of your snowfall isn't going to stick, especially to those paved surfaces. Most likely it will not stick on there. Now, this would be by Friday morning, right around midnight, and then moving through early on Friday. It's starting to move over to the east. Now, let's start moving closer to the Great Lakes perspective. What's going to happen now? This is again Friday about midnight, and you're starting to see some of that snowfall move through southeastern Iowa, northeastern Missouri, and then move through northern parts of Illinois, and then northern Indiana, southern Michigan, and northern Ohio. Gets in on this by Friday morning, and then as we continue this, you're going to start to see by Friday, right around your lunchtime, it's starting to move through areas into the northeast from Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and it's going to continue to move eastward. Now we're not looking at a lot of severe weather with this. This isn't one of those monster systems like we saw just a few days ago with those very strong winds and all that severe weather over areas in Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. We're not going to see any of that with this system, so it's nothing like that. Your winds aren't going to be nearly as bad. You're not going to have any severe weather for the most part, maybe a couple of thunderstorms, but does nothing that looks severe. So definitely it doesn't look to be as big of a system as our previous system that we saw just a couple days ago. Now it's starting to move through the northeast. Let's start looking at what the northeast is looking like for the system. This will be by Friday late afternoon, getting through your evening time, and it's moving through again northern Pennsylvania, southern New York, and then as we continue starts to move through southern New England. Now the GFS wants to put this is the European. The European keeps this further to the south through the northeast and New England states. It kind of moves straight eastward from the Rockies, straight eastward pretty much. But the GFS model puts your low pressure system in northeastern Pennsylvania instead of where your low pressure system is with this system. It's mainly right around Virginia and Maryland by this point, so it's not as far north, and that's going to allow areas in southern New England and parts of southern upstate New York to get more snowfall than what the GFS is producing. The GFS is producing snowfall only for those higher elevations in upstate New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire, but both of them agree on some pretty heavy snowfall for northern Pennsylvania and southern upstate New York or western New York. And you see, this would be by Saturday morning, right around when you're waking up is this frame, and you start to see rainfall mainly for the coastal areas, but then as you get just inland, you're starting to see a bit of mixing, and then you go a little bit more inland, and you're seeing some snowfall out of this, and then this would be by Saturday morning, and then it starts to taper off. So you do have a good chance of seeing some accumulating snow through the northeast and parts of the Great Lakes like Ohio and Michigan, as when you're seeing your snowfall, it's going to be the nighttime, so it's, of course, you don't have to deal with that sun angle, but areas like Indiana, Illinois, through Iowa, and parts of Missouri, some of the time that you're seeing some snowfall is going to be during the day, so you're going to have to compete with that sun angle. So here's what you're seeing out of the European in terms of snowfall, and then we'll quickly look at the GFS model. We have about 2 to 6 inches in those blues, and then we have about 6 to 10 inches in those purples and pinks. So we do see a good area of 6 to 10 inches. The European model putting out for southern Iowa, northern Missouri about 6 to about 9 inches, while the National Weather Service forecast office here, I'll show you their snowfall amounts. They're putting out about 13 inches of snowfall in some of these areas. So that is a bit much for me. I don't think you're actually going to see 13 inches, but we'll see. It's definitely something that's on the table, and it's definitely a possibility. Now, back to your European snowfall amounts, we do see that 2 to 6 inch swath continue through northern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and then through southern Michigan, and then through northern Pennsylvania. You actually see a good swath of it, again, 6 to 10 inches through northern Pennsylvania and southern New York. And then as we move it to the northeast, you start to see in some of those higher elevation, hilly areas, you could see maybe, according to the European model, this is what they're putting out, 6 to 8 inches of snowfall. I think it's going to be toned down a little bit for those areas into Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and even through New Hampshire and Vermont. But I do think northern Pennsylvania, southern New York is pretty good, is a pretty good amount. I think it is going to see about 6 to 8 inches over those areas. Now, here's what the GFS model is putting out in terms of snowfall here. Now, let's start to look at what the GFS is putting out. It's putting out through southern Iowa, northern Illinois, northern Indiana. It's putting out some pretty good snowfall. Your low pressure system would be in southwestern Missouri, a little bit further north than what the European model was putting out at the same frame. You do see the rain snow line isn't reaching as much of northern Missouri, central Illinois, and central Indiana like the European model was showing. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. If the GFS were to be would be correct, this wouldn't be as snowy of a solution. Now, as you continue, this starts to move over to the northeast. You start to see that snowfall, but even it pushes that rain snow through almost to the New York state line with Pennsylvania, and you start to see snowfall barely creeping into Pennsylvania, unlike what the European was putting out, 6 to maybe even 10 inches of snowfall over those areas. Now, as we continue this, you start to see only those hilly regions of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire are seeing snowfall out of this. The rest is all rain. So the GFS definitely has a much farther north solution. You have a very wide area of low pressure system that's stuck over eastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, and southwestern or southeastern New York. And it's very far to the north compared to what the European model had with a low pressure system in Virginia, which would allow that snowfall to move further to the south. Now, what does this produce in terms of snowfall from the GFS? You're seeing a good 2 to 6 inches of snowfall for southern Iowa, northern Missouri, and maybe even eastern Nebraska there. Now, as we move to the Great Lakes, you're seeing through central and northern Illinois, northern Indiana, northern Ohio, and then through southern Michigan, you're seeing about 2 to 6 inches, and maybe a couple inches, seeing over 6 inches, just barely. And then as we move to the northeast, very much lesser snowfall amounts here. You're seeing about 2 to maybe 6 inches of snowfall at the maximum, probably more like 2 to 4 inches out of the GFS, and it's definitely not as widespread as what the European model was putting out. Now, let's compare both of these, just taking a wider view of this, and let's compare both of these. You see the European model really putting out the bulk of its snowfall as we get through Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and then through Pennsylvania, and then through all the way through the Northeast. I'm circling the area that has about 2 to 6 inches, and then as we continue through the GFS model, you see those areas that had 2 to 6 inches are probably just getting a dusting or a coating of snowfall here. So it is a much lesser solution in terms of snowfall, and it would be more of a weaker system with the GFS model. Now, here's what the National Weather Service is putting out, and usually as you get to the later parts of these events, the National Weather Service tones down the amount. So you see over northern Pennsylvania, southern New York, through the rest of New England, you're seeing very light snowfall amounts, probably just 1 to 3 inches, nothing really too dramatic there, but it is probably going to go up, those snowfall amounts from the National Weather Service, because they do like to tone it down in case something drastic changes, and then as we get closer to those events, they like to kind of add some more snowfall to those amounts. But you see, we have a good 2 to 6 inch swath, kind of like what the European was putting out, and it has a much heavier snowfall accumulation through southern Iowa, northern Missouri, and then as we continue further eastward, it starts to taper off, but that's again just because they're not trying to go with some crazy amount 2 or 3 days out when they still don't know what's going to happen really for these areas through the Northeast. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. I will put out another video if this forecast changes quite a bit, if something in the models changes, or if the models start to push further south a lot, or if they start to push further north a lot. I will try to make another video for this on this topic. But anyway, guys, that was Eli. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.